On one of the coldest nights in the Silver Pine Mountains, a man living alone in a remote cabin opened his door to find 3 towering winged beings standing in the snow, watching him in silence. But it wasn't their presence that made his heart race. It was the small, injured creature lying near his porch, and the unspoken message in their golden eyes. Help it. What followed would change his life forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Now, let's jump into the story. On one of the coldest nights of the year, Reed Ashford sat alone at the small wooden table in his cabin deep in the Silver Pine Mountains. Outside, the wind howled through tall pine trees, carrying with it the sound of snow tapping against the windows. The nearest town was more than 40 miles away, and the world outside his door felt like another planet. Reed was used to this kind of solitude. As a naturalist who studied rare and disappearing forest animals, he often spent weeks at a time in remote places. But that night, something felt different, as if the cold itself was holding its breath. He was writing notes in his field journal when he heard it. A faint, almost musical sound, muffled by the thick snow. It wasn't the creak of trees or the cry of an owl. It was something entirely unfamiliar. Reed paused, listening carefully. The sound came again, this time clearer, but still strange, like a distant call carried on the wind. Curiosity pushed him to his feet. He crossed the room, pulled on his heavy coat, and opened the front door. A blast of icy air hit his face, stealing his breath. For a moment, all he could see was white. The snow was falling so thickly, it looked like the static on an old television screen. Then his eyes adjusted, and he froze in place. There, in the clearing just beyond his porch, stood 3 enormous shapes. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall, sleek, and covered in scales as dark as charcoal. Each had great wings folded tightly against its body. Their long necks curved with a grace that seemed both powerful and ancient. And their eyes, deep golden eyes, locked onto him with a focus that made his heart pound. Reed's first instinct was to slam the door shut. This was impossible. Nothing in his years of study, no field guide, no scientific paper, had prepared him for this. But something in their stillness held him there. They did not charge. They did not roar. They simply stood, their breaths forming pale clouds in the freezing night air. He stepped cautiously onto the porch, every muscle tense. The snow crunched under his boots as he leaned forward, trying to understand what he was looking at. The creatures did not move closer. Instead, they seemed to be waiting. Reed could feel it, an unspoken message hanging in the air. Then he heard it again. But this time, it was not coming from the clearing. It was closer, lower, more fragile. Looking down, Reed spotted a small shape lying in the snow near the bottom of the porch steps. His breath caught. It was a smaller version of the great beings before him, no larger than a house cat, with delicate underdeveloped wings. Its scales were a softer shade, shimmering faintly in the porch light. One of its legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, and its sides rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. Reed's gaze lifted to the 3 towering figures. They watched him intently, their eyes unblinking. There was no sound but the wind and the faint whimper from the little one in the snow. The message could not have been clearer. They wanted him to help. He knelt down slowly, speaking in a low voice he used with injured wildlife. "Easy now," he murmured, not sure if the creature could understand him, but feeling the need to reassure it anyway. As he reached out, he was struck by how warm it felt beneath his gloves. radiating heat even in the bitter cold. Its scales were smooth and slightly damp, like river stones warmed by the sun. For a moment, he hesitated. His mind raced with questions. What was he doing? What were these beings? Would the larger ones allow him to touch their young? But the tiny creature let out another faint cry, weaker than before, and that decided it. With slow, careful movements, Reed slid his hands under the small body, lifting it against his chest. It was lighter than he expected, no more than 10 pounds. And he could feel its rapid heartbeat through his cowl. When he looked up again, the 3 adults had not moved, but their eyes seemed to soften, just slightly. He turned toward the cabin, his boots sinking into the deep snow. Behind him, there was no sound of pursuit or resistance. As soon as he stepped inside and shut the door, the warmth of the wood stove wrapped around him, but he could still feel the chill of what had just happened. Placing the little one gently on a folded blanket near the stove, he glanced out the window. The clearing was empty. The 3 tall figures had vanished into the swirling snow, leaving not even a trace of their presence. Reed stood there for a long moment, trying to process what he had just seen. This was no dream. This was real. 3 towering winged beings had appeared outside his home, entrusted him with their injured young, and disappeared without a sound. His life, quiet and predictable until that moment, had just taken a turn into the unknown. As he looked down at the small creature curled on the blanket, its breathing steady but shallow, Reed knew one thing with certainty. Whatever this was, it was only the beginning. The cabin was warm, lit only by the soft glow of the wood stove. Reed Ashford knelt beside the injured creature, feeling the strangeness of the moment settle around him. The wind outside roared through the pine trees, but inside there was only the faint crackle of burning wood and the shallow breathing of the small being on the blanket. Its scales caught the firelight, revealing subtle shades of silver and blue beneath the gray surface. The injured leg was bent in a way that made Reed wince. He had treated injured foxes, owls, and once even a mountain lynx during his years in the wilderness. But nothing like this. Still, the basic rules of care applied. Keep the creature warm, safe, and calm. Reed moved slowly, speaking in a low, steady tone, as if the young one might understand his words. "You're safe now," he said, reaching for his field medical kit. It was a well-stocked bag he always kept ready, with supplies for splinting, cleaning wounds, and treating animals in emergencies. He had no idea if any of it would work for a being like this, but it was all he had. He began by checking the creature's breathing. It was rapid but steady, and when he gently touched its side, he felt the rise and fall of its chest. The warmth coming from its body surprised him again. Despite the freezing temperatures outside, it felt as though it carried its own internal heat source. Carefully, he examined the damaged leg. The break was clean, which was better than he had feared. Using thin wooden splints from his kit and soft strips of cloth, he set the bone in place. The creature twitched once, but did not try to pull away, its amber eyes fixed on his face, as if studying him. As he worked, Reed's thoughts kept circling back to the moment outside. The larger beings had not made a sound. Yet they had communicated their intent without words. They had trusted him, a stranger, with one of their young. That kind of trust was rare, even among humans, and it weighed heavily on him now. When the splint was secured, Reed turned his attention to the wings. They were small, not yet strong enough for flight, but beautiful in their delicate structure. One wing was held at an odd angle, but after gently feeling along its length, he decided it was only bruised. The little one gave a soft trill, a sound that reminded him of the songbirds he used to track in the early mornings. "It's all right," he murmured, more to himself than the creature. "We'll get you through this." Once the medical work was done, Reed fetched a shallow bowl of water. At first, the creature only sniffed it, then began lapping at it with a thin, forked tongue. Watching it drink, he felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Next came food. His refrigerator held a few cuts of raw meat from a recent hunting trip, and he decided to try a small piece. He placed it near the creature, expecting hesitation, but it leaned forward and devoured the meat with surprising speed. Reed chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "At least feeding you won't be a mystery." After it had eaten, Reed adjusted the blankets to make a small nest. He kept the creature close to the stove, but not too near the heat, checking to ensure it was comfortable. As the night deepened, he found himself talking to it, the way he often did with wild animals during long stretches of solitude. "I don't know what you are," he said, "and I don't know where your family's gone. But I do know you're hurt, and I'm not the kind of man to turn away from that." The creature blinked slowly, its gaze never leaving his. Reed could have sworn there was understanding in those eyes, an intelligence that felt far more advanced than any animal he had studied. Time passed unnoticed as Reed sat beside the little one. Outside, the storm raged on, hiding the forest in layers of snow. In here, there was only the warmth of the fire and the quiet bond forming between man and creature. Eventually, Reed realized he should rest. But before he did, he took out his field notebook and began documenting everything: measurements, colors, behaviors. Each detail was carefully written down. Though he knew this was not the kind of entry he could ever share openly, no one would believe it. He paused, tapping the pen against the page. "You need a name," he said softly, looking at the small, curled figure on the blanket. After a moment, he decided, "How about Lumina? It means light, and you, little one, brought light into the darkest night." Lumina made a faint sound, almost like approval. Reed smiled, closing the notebook. When he finally lay down in his bed, he kept one ear tuned to the soft sounds near the stove. Each time he drifted toward sleep, he woke again to check on her. Lumina slept quietly, her splinted leg resting at an angle, her wings tucked close. By morning, the storm had calmed, leaving the forest blanketed in untouched snow. Reed stood at the window, spanning the tree line for any sign of the great beings from the night before. There was nothing, only silence and stillness. He turned back toward Lumina, who was now awake and watching him closely. "Your family's out there somewhere," he said, "but for now, it's just you and me." And in that moment, Reed knew he had crossed a threshold. His life was no longer his own quiet routine in the wilderness. It was now intertwined with a mystery larger than anything he had ever imagined. The days that followed were unlike anything Reed Ashford had ever experienced in his years of living alone in the Silver Pine Mountains. The cabin, once a place of silence and routine, was now alive with the soft sounds and curious movements of Lumina, the small, winged being he had taken in. Outside, the snow still lay heavy on the ground, and the forest remained quiet, but inside, a new rhythm was forming. Each morning, Reed would wake to find Lumina already watching him from her nest of blankets near the stove. Her amber eyes followed his every movement, alert and thoughtful. It was a gaze that held no fear, only a calm awareness that seemed far beyond her size and age. Reed would greet her softly, bringing fresh water and preparing her first meal of the day. Usually small cuts of raw meat or freshly caught fish from the stream that still flowed under the ice. Feeding her quickly became a routine. Lumina would approach the food slowly, as if assessing it, then eat with surprising speed and precision. She seemed to prefer fish over meat, her forked tongue flicking against the pieces before swallowing them whole. Reed took note of every preference, every reaction, writing it all down in his field notebook. Each page filled with details, her growth measurements, her changing behavior, and the soft trilling sounds she made when content. As the days passed, Reed noticed how quickly she was healing. The splint on her leg had stayed in place, and though she still favored it, she was beginning to move more on her own. Sometimes she would attempt to stretch her wings, holding them out slightly before tucking them back again. Reed suspected she was testing her strength, preparing for a day when she might use them in flight. During the long, quiet hours, he found himself talking to her more than he expected. It felt natural, as if she was listening. "You're different from anything I've ever studied," he would say while sketching her profile. "You're not afraid of me, not even a little. That means you've seen humans before. Or you're smarter than most people realize." Lumina would respond in her own way, tilting her head, making a soft sound, or following him across the cabin when he moved. It wasn't just her intelligence that surprised him, but her patience. She never lashed out, never resisted his handling when he checked her leg or wings. He began to feel that she understood his intentions, that she knew he was trying to help. Yet Reed also carried an unshakable awareness that she was not meant to stay. Her family, those towering beings from the night she arrived, were still somewhere in the forest. He imagined them keeping a careful watch, staying hidden but always near enough to know she was safe. The thought brought both comfort and unease. Several times, Reed considered calling Dr. Marin Hart, a trusted colleague from the university. She would be the only person he could imagine sharing this with. But every time he reached for the satellite phone, he stopped himself. Once word of Lumina's existence got out, it wouldn't just be scientists who came looking. There would be government agencies, news crews, and people with far less noble intentions. Poachers would see her as a prize. The military might see her as a weapon. The safest choice, he knew, was to keep her a secret. So the days passed in a kind of quiet partnership. Reed took care of her needs, and Lumina filled the cabin with a presence that was both comforting and mysterious. He adjusted her splint once, noting how much she had grown in just a short time. Her appetite increased, and she began exploring small areas of the cabin when he left the blanket nest open. Sometimes, Reed would catch her staring out the window at the snowy clearing, as if sensing something beyond his understanding. He wondered if she could hear or smell her kin, or if she simply longed for the open sky. He knew the day would come when she would leave, but he tried not to think about it. For now, she was here, and that was enough. In the evenings, when the fire burned low, Reed would sit by the stove and work on sketches of her in his notebook. His drawings captured the fine details, the shimmer in her scales, the intricate pattern along her wings, the curve of her narrow snout. He felt a sense of pride in recording her image, even if no one else ever saw it. There were moments when the bond between them felt almost human. Once, while he was writing, Lumina hopped clumsily onto the low bench beside him. She nosed at the end of his pencil, then tried to bite it, her tiny teeth leaving marks in the wood. Reed laughed softly and took it back, telling her she wasn't allowed to eat his writing tools. The more time he spent with her, the more certain he became that she was far more than an animal. She was a thinking, feeling being. And with that realization came an even greater sense of responsibility. She trusted him, and he could not betray that trust. On the 6th day, the weather shifted. The snow stopped, and a pale sunlight spilled across the clearing outside. The world looked clean and new, untouched but for the tracks of deer and foxes. Lumina pressed close to the window, her breath fogging the glass, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. Reed followed her gaze, but saw nothing unusual. Still, he felt a change in the air. That night, he wrote in his journal longer than usual. He described her progress, her growing strength, and the way she seemed to sense things he could not. He ended the entry with a single line. "I don't know how much longer she will stay, but I will be ready when the time comes." Reed closed the notebook and glanced at Lumina, curled in her nest. The firelight shimmered over her scales, and for a moment, the cabin felt like the center of something vast and unexplainable. He didn't yet know it, but the quiet days were about to end. It was just before dawn when Reed Ashford awoke to an unfamiliar light spilling through the frost-covered window. The fire in the stove had burned low, but the cabin was filled with a faint silver glow that was not from the moon or the sun. He rose quietly, pulling on his boots, and stepped to the window. The snow outside glittered in the strange light, each flake catching it as if the world had been dusted with tiny crystals. And at the far edge of the clearing, 3 tall, shadowed figures stood waiting. Reed's breath caught. It was them, the great beings from that first night. Their wings were half open, shimmering faintly in the glow, and their golden eyes shone like lanterns in the cold. They made no sound, but their presence filled the air with a weight that pressed against his chest. Behind him, he heard movement. Lumina had left her nest and was hobbling toward the door, her splinted leg moving with more steadiness than before. Her eyes were fixed on the figures outside. Reed crouched beside her, his voice low. "It's your family," he said softly. "They've come for you." For a moment, Lumina stayed still, looking between him and the clearing, as if she understood exactly what he had said. Then she moved closer to the door, her small claws clicking on the wooden floor. Reed hesitated, a knot tightening in his chest. He knew this moment would come, but he had not expected it to arrive so soon. He opened the door slowly, letting the icy air rush inside. Lumina stepped out onto the porch, pausing to sniff the cold morning. The 3 great beings did not move forward, but their eyes never left her. Snow fell gently around them, the flakes catching in Lumina's scales, until she seemed to glow from within. Reed followed her into the clearing, his boots crunching in the snow. He stopped halfway, not wanting to intrude. Lumina turned to face him one last time. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the rest of the world fell away. Reed thought of the quiet days they had shared, the careful feedings, the gentle trills, the trust she had placed in him without hesitation. In her gaze, he saw gratitude, and perhaps even recognition of the choice he had made to protect her. One of the towering beings stepped forward, folding its wings slightly to make space for her. Lumina limped the last few steps, then nestled close to its side. The others closed in around her, creating a living wall of protection. There was no roar, no sudden flight. Instead, the group began to move toward the far tree line, their pace slow but deliberate. As they walked, the light in the clearing seemed to fade, as though they carried it with them. Reed stood watching until the last glimpse of their dark forms vanished into the shadows of the forest. The only sound left was the soft hiss of snow landing on snow. He remained there for several minutes, the cold biting at his face, his breath rising in pale clouds. When he finally turned back toward the cabin, he felt the emptiness waiting inside. The nest of blankets near the stove looked smaller without her curled in it. But when he sat down at his table, opening his field notebook, he found his hands steady. He began to write, recording every detail, the glow in the clearing, the way Lumina had looked at him, the silent departure into the trees. It was the final entry in a chapter of his life that no one else would believe. But it was his, and it was enough. As the hours passed, the light outside shifted from silver to pale gold. The day was quiet, the forest calm, as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet Reed knew the truth. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of human eyes, Lumina was with her own kind again. He thought about the choice he had made, to keep her presence a secret. He had no doubt that if word had spread, the ending would have been very different. Instead of returning to the safety of the wild, she might have been caged, studied, or hunted. In letting her go, he had done the only thing that felt right. That night, as snow began to fall again, Reed stood by the window with a mug of coffee in his hands. He scanned the clearing, knowing he would not see them, but feeling their presence all the same. The forest held its mysteries close, and he had been granted the rare gift of seeing one. He whispered into the quiet, "Goodbye, Lumina," and in the hush of the falling snow, it seemed to him that the air stirred in response, as if somewhere far above the trees, a small voice had answered. Reed closed the curtains and returned to his work, his life settling back into the solitude he had always known. But the memory of those days, the night they arrived, the trust they had shown, and the farewell under falling snow would remain with him forever.